Good evening, everybody, on Zoom and Facebook Live. I am Dr. Christina Pardo, and it really is a joy to welcome everybody to our Central Brooklyn Political Action Association New York City Mayor Forum. I'm a physician and a community advocate first, and we are really at a transformational time in society, and it's time that we refocus how we think about our community and our safety, and there's no better place to do that than in the community. And so it's a pleasure to be here at Life of Hope. The community always knows best, they know first, and they always inform us on what we have to do, and Life of Hope is a special place that does that right here in Central Brooklyn. The Central Brooklyn Political Action Association is dedicated to the individuals who want to get involved and get engaged in their community. The mission is to strive for real change in action, putting people over politics, address real issues and concerns affecting residents of here in Central Brooklyn, engage citizens, and help build strong neighborhoods through political action and civic engagement. CBPAA supports communities that are inclusive but preserve the historical and cultural legacy of our neighborhoods. And it is a pleasure, honor to be here with my co-host, co-moderator, Mr. George Albro.
Hi, everyone. I also want to welcome everybody. I'm a lawyer. Please don't hold that against me. I am founder and co-chair of the New York Progressive Action Network, or NYPAN. We were founded in 2016 around the Bernie Sanders campaign in New York. We're now a statewide organization with 25 chapters around all over New York State. We have 10 chapters in New York City. We're an affiliate of Our Revolution, an organization founded by Bernie to promote a progressive agenda and elect progressive candidates. We're also an affiliate of the Working Families Party, which just last week had a great victory in getting hundreds of thousands of votes, jumping over the conservative line and now being row C on the ballot. We also played a role in getting rid of the IDC and electing progressive Democrats to the state Senate, winning voting reforms like early voting, and suing the Board of Elections when they tried to cancel the presidential primary, and we won in court, and so everyone was able to vote. If you want to learn more about NYPAN, you can go to our website at nypan.org. Tonight's program will be in two parts. Part one will feature the following four candidates in one group, and that will be Catherine Garcia, former Department of Sanitation Commissioner of New York City, Carlos Menchaca, who's a current council member in the 38th District in Brooklyn, encompassing Sunset Park and surrounding areas. The current controller of New York City, Scott Stringer, and Mayoral, the former chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. Part two will feature four additional candidates, and they will be on at 7:30. Those candidates will be Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough President, Sean Donovan, the former Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Diane Morales, an Executive Director and CEO of Phipps Neighborhoods, and Lori Sutton, the former Department of Veteran Services Commissioner. So the way this will work is that each candidate will be asked to do the following. A, make an opening statement about themselves and their campaign, and whatever else they would like to discuss for 2 minutes. Then we moderators, Dr. Pardo and myself, will ask 3 questions, and each candidate in each group will have 2 minutes to answer those questions. And then, time permitting, we will try and ask some questions posed by the audience. I want to just finally remind everyone that this is not a debate, this is not an endorsement interview, but an educational event to introduce the public to the current mayoral candidates and their thoughts on crucial issues facing our city. So before we start, I am privileged to introduce, for some welcoming remarks, Perez Laksama. He's the founder of the Central Brooklyn Political Action Association and a invaluable educator in the Brooklyn Haitian and Caribbean communities. Perez.
I don't know if everybody can see me. I'm good. Can you go a little up? Yeah. Bonsoir, buenas tardes. Good evening, sac passé. Again, my name is Perez Oksama. George, thank you for the kind words. And it's a privilege, as George said, it is a forum. We welcome you at our community, Central Brooklyn, at Life of Hope. First of all, I'd like to thank Jimani Williams for the initiative, and George, who is the grandfather of Life of Hope, and also, and everything's going on. Also, I have to thank Father One, who is also founder of Life of Hope, and the chair in the Brooklyn Diocese doing great work. So, Dr. Pardo, I'm going to give you the microphone again. Welcome, and I hope we can be, again, that's the word today, civilized, and it can be inform our community, especially in this tough time. Again, we love you all. We're going to cheer for you tonight, and do the best we can. Love you. Have a good forum.
I think we'll turn it to Father Juan.
Thank you. My name is Father Juan, a priest from Diocese of Brooklyn, and also serve at St. Bernard Shrine here in Dacker Heights, and also member of Life of Hope Center. So, as a Catholic priest, I'm going to pray the way that He taught me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, may everything we do begin with your inspiration and continue with your help, so that all our prayer and work may begin in you, and by you be happily ended. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct the deliberation of these candidates for the office of mayor tonight. Shine forth in all the proceeding reform for our rule and government. May they seek to preserve peace, promote national happiness, and continue to bring us the blessing of liberty and equality. Let us pray and say a reading from the most popular book of the Bible, from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 to 25. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 to 25. Do you know that in all race, all the runner won, but only one get the prize? One in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competed in the game go into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Bow our head and pray for God's blessing. Almighty God, we ask you to bless this candidate. Give them the wisdom to share the plan and vision with the community, and knowing that you call them to serve and to govern according to your will. May God strengthen all the candidates for the New York Mayor Forum, the future of public services and safety, and bring your work to completion. May hope accompany your journey to the day of election to come. May God abiding present be with you on this forum tonight and all the day of your life as a candidate for the office of Mayor of New York City. Praise be Jesus Christ now and forever, and we all say amen.
Amen.
God bless America. God bless New York City. God bless Professor Powers of Life of Hope and all of you and the audience. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless you all.
Thank you. And I think we have the privilege of public advocate Jimani Williams that's going to give us some opening remarks before we head to the main show.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate it. And thank you to all the candidates who have joined us today, and to everyone at home tuning in this crucial conversation among some of the folks who are running for mayor. And yes, that does not include me. So we're going to move forward with the folks who are running. And of course, as the people's advocate, the public advocate is the only citywide election running to be reelected. Let's have some strong strong interest in who wants to lead our city through this very important moment. I am a member of the Central Brooklyn Political Action Association and its parent organization, NYPAN, a founding member of NYPAN actually. And so I'm glad to have this opportunity. Thank you to them for putting this together and for allowing me to speak. Today we're going to try to focus, I believe, the questions will be mostly around public safety in New York City and hopefully how we can reimagine those. Obviously, you can't have an entire conversation on this in just a few moments with all the candidates. So hopefully we can get at least some ideas of what the candidates are thinking. Maybe the compounding crisis that our city is facing, next mayor will inherit a lot. A new reckoning on racial justice issues, policing issues, economic issues, based on incidences and activism we've seen, felt, and been a part of for many, many years. At this time, there's an opportunity for just tremendous change, not to go back to normal, but to go back to better than normal, because normal didn't work for a lot of people. And so if we commit to a positive vision, avoid the urge to revert to our corners and our talking points, meaningful shifts in our funding and our laws around policing, shifts in the way we think about public safety, not only possible, they really are essential. So if we're not willing to go further to commit these resources to a complex rather than simple acute solutions, we see limited success and repetition in our failures. In order to protect and promote public safety, we got to redefine it. It's not solely, I think we know at this point, about policing, and it's not fully separate. It relies on everyone playing their role to co-produce public safety within a framework that enables New Yorkers to examine it, strengthen our relationships to communities, and ensure members of all communities are empowered. In our schools, we need to maximize the number of social workers and psychologists and restorative justice. In our streets, we need a community-centered approach toward gun violence. Across our systems, we can change our laws and focus to prioritize on public health. The issues are structural, and confronting them is an extraordinary task, but we can't let ourselves be confounded into inaction by their complexity. We need to meet this moment by exhibiting leadership, not by approximating it. Through job performance, not performative gestures. Leadership in the face of these challenges is about fulfilling a positive vision, to know the right path, then determine how to achieve it, to focus on the details, but not the political wins. With true leadership, New Yorkers will partner in progress. We have to have boldness, and we have to have people who can manage. And with that, I want to turn it over to a conversation with the people hoping to fill that leadership gap as our next mayor. Like many people at home, I am actually waiting with bated breath to see what folks have to say. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. How do we move forward from that? But I guess we will. So I will start now with the introductions of our candidates. Each of our candidates will have 2 minutes to to provide an opening statement, tell us a little bit about his or her background and the reason that they're running for mayor. The order was selected randomly, and so first we have the former commissioner for the Department of Sanitation, is Catherine Garcia.
And thank you so much for having me. I wish we could have been together. I do miss people in the Zoom world. But I'm running for mayor because I love this city. And I'm a lifelong New Yorker who grew up here, who raised my children here. And it is incredibly important to me that we come out of this stronger and more equitable than we have in the past. And that's why I'm running. I understand that we need to be laser focused on the fundamentals of government, which really at the end of the day is going to be about people feeling safe in their communities, people feeling like places are clean, children getting back to school who are young, and being able to get a job in this city, and that there's economic mobility for all, which is why I'm very focused on how we leverage the real assets we have, CUNY, our high schools, to make a difference. But I'm the only one in this campaign who has a lot of crisis management in city government. So not only was I commissioner of sanitation for many years, but also during the pandemic, I was tasked with just make sure nobody goes hungry. That was the mission. And we were able to set up a program in a matter of days that in May was delivering 1 million meals and distributing another 500,000. Not the easiest task to pull off in the middle of a pandemic, but it was about the management skills and figuring out how to be a leader on that topic, which I had not known much about, but also all of the other things that I've done through the course of my career, whether or not that's making sure everyone gets up every day and can brush their teeth and there's clean drinking water, or working really hard to make sure we had a plan to reduce childhood lead poisoning. That's really close to my heart. And one of the things we talk about, criminal justice system that we think had an impact on the criminal justice system. But I just want to wrap up by saying thank you for having me here, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we have New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer.
Well, thank you very much to the Central Brooklyn Political Action Association, and I want to especially thank Jumaane Williams. I'm very happy and excited to be here to exchange ideas. And let me just say at the outset, the recovery of New York City economically cannot be done without the people on the Zoom tonight, with community-based organizations, with the advocates and activists who know communities so well. And just to put this into perspective, when you think back to February of 2020, pre-COVID, the unemployment rate was a record 3.4%. And over the 10 years, we had created close to 970,000 jobs in the city. And once COVID hit, within 30 days, that unemployment rate went from 3.4% to 20%. And for people of color, it hit 25%. And the city was in a financial situation, the likes we have never seen, like the Great Depression. And through the lens of that fight, that COVID fight, we also knew that COVID hit communities of color especially hard. This was a disease, a virus that went to the most vulnerable communities in Brooklyn and the Bronx. And I remember on the night that my mother passed away from COVID in April, I remember the doctor telling me very clearly that this was not a disease that only impacted older folks, but in fact, 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, Black people, Latino people, people who had been managing diabetes and obesity were the ones most vulnerable. And the reason for that was the city government never really tried to solve health disparity issues or build affordable housing or create healthy communities. We've only been about managing disease. And as mayor, I believe I have the vision and the skill set to change that paradigm, to redirect resources and policies that's going to lift up every community and keep communities safe. So for me, you know, I do think talk is cheap. As controller, I've issued serious proposals about how we can deal with the fundamental issues facing the city. We're going to bring back New York. It starts with our small businesses. I have a 25-point plan to reimagine and rebuild our small businesses.
Thank you, and we look forward, if you want to close off your thought, we look forward to that
and I look forward to doing that.
Yes, thank you very much. And next we have the former chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, Ms. Maya Wiley.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here and to hear from all of my colleagues on the Zoom. You know, I have two daughters, and my younger daughter, when she was 14, a few years back, who's a very artistic kid, who said to me, "Mom, I figured it out. If I want to be an artist, I'm going to need a service job, and that means I am going to have to pay $600 a month for rent. Where am I going to live?" Because what she understood is it wasn't New York City. And it took me immediately back to my own childhood, living in a Black neighborhood, when my best friend disappeared one day, literally disappeared, because her mother, who was a cashier at a grocery store, could not pay the rent when it got increased. And I watched my neighborhood displaced over time. I spent 30 years of my adult life, my entire career, working as a civil rights attorney, as a racial justice advocate, explicitly to make sure that there were no more little girls who looked like me or Charlene, my best friend, who would have the experiences that she had. And I was grateful for the opportunity to work on everything from, you know, education funding in Louisiana when I was at the ACLU, or access to health care when I was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, went into federal government also for a while, hoping to bring the power of the federal government to civil rights work. And, founding ultimately an organization called the Center for Social Inclusion that I led for 12 years in order to do our mission, which was dismantle structural racism, because Charlene did not live a single issue life. It was healthcare, it was schools, it was housing, it was her mother's job. And here's the thing, when Bill de Blasio ran for mayor, I was so grateful for the opportunity to work for city government, because it is city government that touches all our lives. And I was grateful for what we got to do there, including getting, every resident in Queensbridge houses free broadband access, something the city government had never done before. But I also saw how it falls down, how it fails.
So
we're,
we're at the end of this, so if you want to finish your thoughts, we can move on to our questions. We look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just stop by saying I'm running because I know we can not just recover from COVID, but reimagine the city so that no little girl has to experience what Charlene did or ask the question my daughter is asking me.
Great, thank you. And last for this first panel, we have New York City Councilmember Carlos Menchaca.
Thank you, Dr. Pardo and George and everyone who put this thing together. It's not easy to do this, but I'm so grateful to be here with you and all my fellow candidates for mayor. I'm Carlos Menchaca. I come from an incredible background of experiences, and what I'm here to talk to you about is my work in the city council and how I see this mayoral campaign really reflecting a lot of things we did in Sunset Park and Red Hook, but what I think needs to happen across this entire city. Last summer, we were confronted with a massive movement that pushed us to think about defunding the NYPD. That failed in the city council, that failed in the mayor's office, and that failed across the entire leadership of this city. We need to change that. We need to talk about what that means. And when we're thinking about public safety and reimagining public safety, it means to remove funding from a bloated budget and bring it into things that we need. And I know that this incredible coalition that brought this thing together, this forum, is going to help teach me about what needs to happen on the ground. So I want to work with you. Go to carlos2021.com, sign up. Let's keep talking about what we need to do. I look forward to the questions today. But I bring the experience of an organizer, having worked for Brooklyn Borough President Marty Markowitz since 2005, and now at the City Council. I've been organizing with a lot of you. Let's make something happen. Now's the time to make it happen. And when our immigrant communities, our Black and brown communities are being impacted by COVID, you all need to be at the center of making this next chapter happen for the city of New York. Thank you.
Great, thank you all very much. So with that, it's time to start with our questions. As many of you have already stated, New York City is one of the most diverse in the country, but we were the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States that disproportionately affected Black and brown communities, with both higher rates of infection and death, which is now over 240,000 in the United States. But having said that, COVID-19 really highlighted the effects of structural racism, where the communities with the highest need have less and are more vulnerable to insult. Of course, none of this was new, and that's really an important thing to recognize. Right here in central Brooklyn, Brownsville has the lowest life expectancy in New York City, and East Flatbush, where we are located right now, has the highest rate of severe maternal morbidity. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, and still now, a lot of the focus was on maternal mortality and the disproportionate, how it disproportionately affects Black women. As a physician, I see it. The numbers do not do the justice of what we see every day, all of us that are on the front line, including those of us here in the community. So if you were mayor, what would you have done differently to protect this community from COVID-19? And looking forward, what would your plan be to protect against health conditions that disproportionately affect this community? And so first, again, you have 2 minutes to answer. And first, we'll start in the reverse, is Carlos Menchaca.
Thank you for this question. I think this question really brings to mind a couple things. One is that we saw from the federal response how much our federal government is integral in really creating the ultimate plan. But what I see the city and what the city could have done, and all the pieces that you're kind of really speaking to, morbidity rates, are all connected to our healthcare system. Our hospitals are underfunded here in the city of New York. And as council member and part of the budget negotiation team, we look heavily on how we furnish more equipment in our hospitals. That was lacking here. We need to do more to bring our public hospitals and connect them to clinics as a system. I know there's a lot of beautiful things happening in Brownsville right now to really empower communities to talk about these things, but not just to talk about them, but also integrate immigrant communities who are often disconnected from healthcare services just simply because the city's not translating all the information. That's the one thing that I saw lacking. A lot of the things we couldn't help because of the federal government, but the things that we can do is communicate to everyone. I think those are the kind of things that we can make better, and that's just through focus. And that's not what's happened in this mayoral race or in this mayoral administration, but will happen when I become mayor.
Great, thank you. So next we have Maya Wiley. Same question going all across.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to recognize your work, Dr. Pardo, and thank you for it. Look, health disparities, as you said, are not new. When COVID hit, it was predictable. We needed to close the schools faster and more decisively and provide the supports for families, recognizing that 600,000 New Yorkers don't have health care insurance. It's actually one of the reasons, as Carlos said, that we have critically important hospitals that are providing services and yet struggling to stay open. And we had community partners we can and should have been drawing on more effectively in partnership with community leaders, community experts, to safely figure out how to deploy the information necessary to help keep folks safe, especially when we knew we had higher rates of illness and more vulnerability. And we should have done that in a way that recognized also that we've been gutting our public health department for years, actually. It used to do much more programmatic work. And we had leadership like Dr. Mary Bassett, who was critically concerned with racial health disparities her entire career. And she had to triage, as the commissioner of health, what kinds of things she did with a budget that had been peeled back for years before COVID ever hit. So there was an opportunity in that emergency where the city was spending to spend effectively into programming that the health department could have done effectively in partnership with community leaders, and recognizing that we were going to have to solve this problem in partnership over time. Because even as we've seen, as we've opened up and as we had some of the opportunities to have communities out and more publicly, that in our communities, gun violence, which is another public health crisis, has skyrocketed because of our same failure to invest in the community partnerships that actually recognize the structural conditions and solve them. And that was an opportunity missed that we could change in the future.
Great, thank you. Scott Stringer.
Look, the bottom line is that this administration was not ready to meet this challenge. And right now, as controller, we are investigating the early days of the pandemic, not to play gotcha with the mayor, but to fully understand what went wrong in getting protective equipment to frontline workers, what went wrong within our hospitals in terms of resources, to recognize the heroes that literally risked their lives to protect people, not knowing where the death was coming from. And as Maya accurately pointed out, it was predictable that the communities most impacted would be communities of color because of the lack of long-term investment in communities. But part of this was a management issue. And in order to get this right, we can no longer speak to the edges. We're going to need a bold leadership plan post-COVID to make sure this never happens again. So step one, we have to have a specific investment strategy in all of our communities. Less policing and more investment in communities will go a long way to stem this tide. When we go to Washington with business and labor and community leaders, we're going to have to make sure that the stimulus package accurately reflects the investment in healthcare and in affordable housing and in education. And we also have to recognize that post-COVID, we're going to have a serious mental health issue with our children in the public school system. there's a lot of kids whose moms and dads died because they were frontline workers. They've lost grandparents. They've lost parents. My kids lost their grandparent to COVID. And the discussion that has to happen now is how we better prepare our kids. The kids do not have access to remote learning. The kids who don't have internet access. All of this is related, and we cannot just simply think that we can do this by a little programming. We're going to have a wholesale review of how the next mayor and the city council will look at budgeting, and I'm very committed to making sure that specifically we start to turn the tide based on the data that we have. Now, I'm hoping that the mayor will turn over the documents I need to conduct a thorough investigation. That remains to be seen. But when we have the data, all of us running for office have to dig deep and realize that you can't manage your way out of a crisis if you don't have a structure in place to do it.
Thank you. And it's Catherine Garcia.
And I appreciate all of my fellow candidates and their comments. You're absolutely correct that this was something that could have been predicted, because it's not just that there is a health disparity racially, but every other facet of it. Why did people get sick? Because they're in overcrowded conditions. It's not what the governor quotes the density issue. It's how overcrowded their housing is. And the fact that they do not have easy access to ongoing health care. Chronic diseases can get managed, but they need to be managed effectively. And that means it's really sometimes the little things. How easy is it for you to get to the doctor? People who died of COVID did have Medicaid or Medicare, but how easy was it for them to take care of their diabetes, to take care of their high blood pressure? And then on another front, why did everyone go to Elmhurst? Why did ambulances continue to go to Elmhurst when it was full? When there were beds in other hospitals, there were beds in Bellevue within the system. The systems did not work together effectively to meet the needs of a massive crisis. And one of the things that I look at is not only what are the structural things we need to be paying attention to going forward, which is about having adequate housing, about having opportunity for people for jobs, about having healthcare in the communities. There are definitely geographic barriers that occur. Some communities who are immigrant communities actually have lots of doctors in that community and do better. And there are other communities that do not have a lot of doctors in their community, they do worse. So that easy access to healthcare, it's not only insurance, it's not only about money, but it's about having them physically located where they're easy to access. But it's also about making our system work effectively. But the ongoing issues that are longer term, which are about education, which are about opportunity, and which are about housing, need to be addressed as well, because at the end of the day, housing is a health issue. Housing is something that is really a health issue. If you do not have stable housing, you have problems physically with your health, you have problems with your mental health, and you will continue to struggle. So housing is a health issue.
Thank you very much. Pass it over to George.
Thank you. The second question has to do with police-community relations. Over the years, there's been a series of incidents where members of the NYPD have used excessive and sometimes lethal force against innocent people of color. This past year, tens of thousands of New Yorkers of all races became involved in the widespread national protests over the unjustified killings of Black and brown individuals in several locations throughout the country, such as the murder of George Floyd by Minnesota police. New York's mostly peaceful protests were met by what many have characterized as brutal and unjustified force by some in the NYPD, and then a mayoral decreed curfew, which many say made matters worse. And this has resulted in some demands to reduce police funding. So this question is two parts. One, what are your thoughts on the suggestion that the Democratic Party is being damaged because of the defund the police movement. And I won't mention who are making that charge. And two, how would you move forward the discussion on policing and public safety? And a subset of that is there a difference between police and public safety? So we'll start with Scott Stringer.
This is an issue that unfortunately is not new to me. I have been arrested on civil disobedience during the Amadou Diallo protests when that individual was shot 52 times in the Bronx. I have stood with Jumaane Williams and other leaders to demand the end of stop and frisk, one of the first leaders in the city to do that. I proposed legislation to end surcharges and debt to the criminal justice system, meaning people who are incarcerated end up coming out debt-ridden and their families are pushed to the edge of homelessness because of the way we treat people in the system. As controller, I was the first controller in the United States to divest from the private prison industrial complex. You see, this isn't about reducing crime. This is about taking black and brown children and shipping them to prisons, and hedge funders are making millions of dollars. This whole system has been about making money and incarcerating people, not for the greater good, but as a way of continuing the systemic racism in society. New York City's mayor has a real opportunity to lead the country in terms of police reform. And what we saw on the streets of our city was something I had never seen in all the years I was protesting. And I started protesting with my cousin Bella Abzug when I was 12 years old. So I spent more time at protests than most people have been alive. And I have never seen the batons and the way, the callous regard that people were treated, press people, innocent people, women, people of color. It was a stain in our city. So the next mayor has got to have a police commissioner aligned with his or her values. The next mayor has to control the department, not the other way around. No shutdowns, no temper tantrums, no going after the most innocent people in our city. And what I would say is that for too long, we have created this pipeline to prison, and it has to break. So quickly, we have to stop over-policing. 40% of 911 calls are for issues that are not for crimes in progress. So why are we sending police officers to do the work of social service agencies? Let's change that from 911 within the department. Let's reduce the NYPD's responsibilities in areas of mental health and traffic accidents and using other trained professionals. That's the way to go. We have to continue to decriminalize for low-level offenses. I was the first elected official in New York City to call for the end of closing Rikers Island.
If you could just finish your thoughts.
And in conclusion, because I could talk about this like many of my colleagues for a very long time, we have to bring down the rate of incarceration with parole reform and reentry services. I say to you is that the issue of directing resources when you have a different mission for police means you can cut the budget and invest in our communities, invest in kids, invest in services, and in guidance counselors. That is what we have to do. We have to take back the criminal justice system and turn it around and really create fundamental change.
Thank you. Maya Wiley, same questions.
I agree with Scott, and I'll start by saying, look, I've been Black all my life, and policing is working exactly as it was designed to. It's control and contain, and that is not public safety. So we have to put the public back in public safety, and that means a soup to nuts, top to bottom restructuring of what we call the New York City Police Department. It is, yes, we got to get rid of Shea. He's earned a pink slip. It's outrageous what we saw from him and protecting the kinds of behaviors we saw. But it's a bigger restructuring than that, because we know we have units of the department we don't necessarily need. We also know that we have to right size it. As Scott says, that means shrink it, because it's been the only agencies that's had an increasing budget year in, year out, even with low crime rates, historically low crime rates, and at the same time getting, of its 15 million calls that it got in a 19-month period, that 13-month period that I looked at, only 2 million of those 15 million were for serious or critical crimes in progress. So that tells us we can actually right size it. But we also have to reorient what it even is, because there are models of policing called problem-oriented policing. It's models that have been around, and we have evaluation of pilots all over the country where policing is about partnership at the community level, absolutely, like what we call community policing, but as problem solving. So when Eric Garner, instead of having a bunch of cops descend to arrest people because they're selling untaxed goods, because shopkeepers were calling them day in, day out, complaining in ways I can understand, but nonetheless, not a crime, not really a crime issue, but call on partnerships in government to say, hey, we're the first line here. This is a problem for other folks to solve, not us. That's a different approach to policing, and it's a better one.
Thank you. Catherine Garcia?
Thank you. Keeping people safe in their communities and ensuring that they feel that they can walk around freely is one of the first responsibilities of any mayor. I do not agree with defund the police. I do believe in community policing and rethinking and reforming the police department. I'm the only one who's ever run a uniform agency. It's a different beast and requires a certain level of real clarity around accountability and discipline. And I fire people. You do the wrong thing at the Department of Sanitation, you get fired. And we understand that. We do that. That is what happens. That is something that I think is pretty straightforward. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to keep communities safe. We need to make sure that they understand and feel in partnership with their agencies. And some of those are really sort of simple reforms we can make. One, we should have officers start when they're 25, not when they're 21. Scott, I know your kids are way younger than mine, but I would not trust my 21-year-old with a gun. Or to solve a human condition. They're not there yet. We should require them to live within the city limits so that they are invested in the city that they serve. And we need to do more on training, and not just training for the front lines, but training for the middle level management, for the sergeants, for the captains, because they are the ones that change the culture of an agency. We need to use the data that they have to focus them on crime. They're really good at crime. Let's figure out how to use it so that they are focused on crime and not wasting their time on other issues. So my view is we need to make it so that we have a much more functional police department that has regained the trust of New Yorkers across every ethnic group. So no one feels that they are being enforced against, but they feel that the police are guardians for them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Carlos Machaca.
Thank you, George. I think your question had two other pieces to it. One of them was about the Democrats, and we're not the Democrats.
Yes, it's them.
So I'm going to answer that. I think that absolutely not. The defund movement has actually allowed for more people to stay engaged in this question about government and how it's going to work for them. I think we need to keep diving into this question and really bring it into communities. I would like the Speaker of the City Council to make me the next public safety chair. With that position, I can really bring the committee work and actually go into communities and have this conversation in multiple languages across the entire city. That's how we're going to actually get somewhere, and then actually build a people's budget. I think it's time the City Council actually pass a budget that we design with you all at the center of it and pass it. The mayor did not allow us to pass a budget that reflected the people's needs. That needs to happen. When we defund the police, we can actually focus on other things like education, healthcare, and bring it back into communities that were impacted by COVID. That's how we have a transformational shift, and we can begin to outline non-police work that our communities need. Because you asked the second question, which is public safety, is that the same thing as police? I think communities define public safety for themselves, and police can be invited to that conversation after communities have done that. And that's going to change across the entire city, which is why we need to focus from the grassroots up.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now to, let's see, is my microphone on? Okay, great. So now to I guess, to get to our third question, to really address the things we think, all the aspects we think are impacting our communities, is that's the economic crisis, housing, food instability, and employment during this time period. As usual, while some of the rich keep getting richer during this COVID pandemic, there are now millions in our city who lack a home, a job, and even food. In our biggest crisis since the Great Depression, and really to say that really is not understated. Working here, the biggest thing I saw affecting health was the housing insecurity. There's really no way to overstate that. Here in Central Brooklyn, we serve a particularly vulnerable community, the immigrant community. 42% of Central Brooklyn population are immigrants, many of whom are more likely to either lose their job or have had increased risk of COVID-19 working as our frontline workers. This is on top of the fact that they are not eligible for many of the COVID-19 relief benefits, many of whom fear detention and deportation. As mayor, their survival would be in your hands. What can the next mayor do to help house, employ, and food desperate New Yorkers? And in your response, please delineate your plan on how you protect the immigrant community as well. Oh, and so we will start with Maya Wiley.
Well, let's start by acknowledging that we do have assets and resources in this city. And in a time of COVID, an opportunity to use those resources to, for example, buy shuttered hotels and know that there are other properties that we can or may be able to take control of that we could use to create community land trusts and create what we need, which is permanently affordable housing and programs that enable people, particularly who are very low and extremely low income, to have the opportunity to access those. And that is something that we can do. And we have the opportunity also to start experimenting with social housing. This is something that now that there is a regime change in Washington, we do have to have conversations also with the federal government about our subsidy structure and how we use it. But the point is, by being a leader that partners both at the community level and with more not-for-profit housing developers, but also looking at our resources and partnering at the state and federal level with how we use those resources effectively so that we can support those in need. And I'm going to add public housing into this because we haven't talked about it yet tonight. But NYCHA, because public housing has to stay public, and we have to make sure that we're using our resources because we have upwards of up to 5,000 units in any given year that we don't even house people in because it's in such disrepair. And the opportunity to allow residents to have more governance, more power over the decision making about how they run. And that's something that community land trusts can help us do. It's also something that changing the governance model for public housing can help us do. So all of those are aspects both of community engagement, of public resources, and also demanding more from for-profit developers because they're in a position to do more. The city didn't demand enough from them in this administration and in past years. That's something that I would change.
Thank you very much. Next, Catherine Garcia.
So I saw firsthand during the summer the real unbelievable strain on people who really could not afford food and was out at food pantries across the city, delivering food, talking to the people on the lines, understanding how bad it was for them. You know, one of the things that I came to recognize is that our emergency food system is incredibly fragile and highly dependent on primarily older volunteers to get it done and not distributed evenly across the city. So one of the things I would focus on is making sure that we strengthen that network in partnership with the nonprofits who do such great work in that area. But moving on from that topic, as we think about what we need going forward, we need to make sure that we have employment for people across the boroughs. But, you know, this is something where we know that we have assets that we can leverage to move forward, and not just in the central business district, but across all of the boroughs. We need pipelines to jobs. To quote Scott, we don't need pipelines to prison, but we need pipelines to jobs. People want to work. They want to contribute to their families. We can help make that happen. And in terms of the undocumented population, I'm very proud during the food czar role that I undertook that we made sure that we did not have barriers to access if you were undocumented. You could go to any school and get a meal. We would deliver to your home without documentation. But the one good thing that did happen from the federal government is they provided something called pandemic EBT, which meant that if you had a child in public school, you got sent $420 per child, and you did not have to be documented. It did not impact the public charge.
Great, thank you. So we've reached our time, and actually, we have next we'll have Scott Stringer.
So look, I think we need to think about how we're going to build the next generation of low-income housing, and we need to do it fast. Tonight, over 60,000 people are going to sleep in homeless shelters, half are children. Believe it or not, in the greatest city in the world, this is very common. And I think the de Blasio administration, in making a deal with Rebney developers to give them height and density in so many of our communities, especially communities of color, in exchange for building affordable housing, what these rezonings really were about was building affordable housing that was unaffordable to the people in the communities. People got pushed out. People ended up in homeless shelters. The response was to then build more shelters, spending hundreds of millions of dollars and not building the housing we need. So I believe we need to build universal affordable housing. I think we need to look at the vacant parcels of land, 566 in Brooklyn alone. That land must go back to the people, must go back to community-based organizations with a subsidy to build the low-income housing that would move 30% of people who work in homeless shelters into affordable housing. We need to build affordable, supportive housing for the 19,000 adults. Some are on the streets, some are in dangerous shelters. We have got to go back to the city and the mayor showing leadership on this issue. This is not new. Mayor LaGuardia built public housing. Then we built the Mitchell-Lama housing program. Ed Koch gave the vacant buildings after flight to the community and built yet another generation of affordable housing. But the de Blasio administration, they made a mistake. They thought that they could do this with Rebney luxury developers. So now what we have is people who are hanging on the edge, longtime residents of communities who invested in neighborhoods that no one wanted to live in 20, 30 years ago, and they built the neighborhoods that have become so valuable. We need a new housing plan. I've offered a plan. It's not the only plan, but I have a roadmap to build the housing that we need to actually move people into safe shelter, keep people in communities. But this rezoning plans.
Thank you. We're if you want to close your thought, we're at the end of your time.
I have closed my thought.
Thank you. And then last,
not less, but I'm done.
Last, we have Carlos Menchaca to finish out that portion of the question.
Thank you, Dr. Pardo. And this was a question about immigration and immigrants in our city. And as chair of the immigration committee, I am deeply embedded in the lives of so many undocumented immigrants and families that have been facing deportation. This mayor refused to give everybody who needed a lawyer when they were facing deportation proceedings. For whatever reason, that's just wrong. What we need to do is continue to ensure that everyone who needs a lawyer, even in this transition to a new administration, we're going to see ICE activity. ICE activity has been in partnership with the NYPD. We need to stop that immediately. That sends a shiver down every immigrant's spine as they engage other city services like food and the census. We saw census rates drop and stay low during our census outreach because of ICE activity in partnership with the NYPD. Those are the kind of things that at the top, very top, the mayor and the commissioner need to change. And so things that I want to support in in really shaping a new direction is, how about the city council become the appointment should come from the city council for the next police commissioner. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about really allowing the people to ensure that there is a civilian approach to leadership at the NYPD. Those are the kind of things that I think my campaign is going to approach, and I'm hoping that my mayoral candidate colleagues will be able to discuss those kind of things, because that's the kind of transformation that we need, not just for our immigrant communities, but across the entire city.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We wanted to allow to collect one or two questions from the audience. We are running a little over time, so I think maybe we'll do one. George, there is a particular topic we received a lot of questions about that I think George is going to pose to the panel. We have 1 minute each to respond to the question.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of the audience asking about gun violence, and that seems to be a very concern. And gun violence is on the rise in many communities, and sadly, homicides. And there seems to be, those communities are sandwiched between the street violence on the one hand, and when they complain about it, over policing, and which doesn't really get to the root of the problem, what's causing the gun violence. So the question is simple. How would you address the crisis of gun violence, and what should the law enforcement role be in that, dealing with that problem? And we'll start from the top again. Catherine Garcia.
Thank you for that question, or from the chat. There are two components here. Is the police have to be on the ground in their communities, and they have to have people trust them, because you find out about what the beef is when people talk to you, which means they need to be engaged in those communities. You need to bring back those things that worked in the past, like the police athletic lead, and ensure that those communications are occurring, so that people are safe and we reduce gun violence, and we are focused on the people who are actually committing the crimes, and not just doing a blanket enforcement action that casts a wide net to capture everyone.
Great. Thank you for your succinct answer.
And it was 1 minute. I was trying to be...
Scott?
I'm gonna try to beat Catherine, right? I'll try to do it in 55 seconds. Look, at the end of the day, the way we're going to stem the tide of gun violence is by mentorship of our young people, to give the programs, to have mentors going into community that kids respect, and build out a system where we give kids hope and opportunity, that we tell them that there are programs and resources for them. And a lot of this has to do with mentorship in the community. We have some great cure violence programs. Unfortunately, out of the 77 precincts, they're only in 17 of those precincts. We should bring that to scale, and we should build out a system that's going to allow people to feel the safety, because people are watching over the children. Look, you know, as Catherine said, I have the two young kids in the campaign, a third grader and a second grader. I worry about the stray bullet every day. Every day they're out. I can't help it. It bothers me. It scares me. I worry about my children. But there are so many parents who are struggling economically, who also worry because they can't be with their kids as much as they would like. And it's up to community and city resources to build out those programs. Yes, you can police, but you're not solving the systemic issues. We have to invest in our kids and in those programs. And whether it's in Oakland to New York, throughout the country, LA, you're starting to see these programs really work. And there are experts that are willing to help us in the city.
Thank you. Mayoral?
No, I am listening to the community right now. We just had a People's Assembly on Monday night with folks. including people who live in public housing, people who live in central Brooklyn, one man who was a former New York City police officer, to engage people in what the solutions to gun violence are explicitly. And we're going to be rolling out proposals actually, hopefully in the next week. But let me just say that gun violence fundamentally is about disinvestment in communities. We have to make it easier to get a job than a gun. And that is including everything from supports for mental health and trauma involved care to workforce development opportunities. We have to invest in our schools and having school safety teams. We do need the community-based crisis intervention model that are built and run by people who have been engaged and are from the community and have that credibility. And we also need to understand that the role for policing is problem solving the problem of illegal guns coming into this city in the first place. And I just had a friend who lost his 22-year-old nephew, and very near where he died 3 weeks ago, a young woman was just killed today in Bed-Stuy. And when more police showed up after the killings, the community was clear. They said, this is not the solution. The shooting already happened. We need to, you need to go out and get the guns, but we need the dollars in our communities that actually strengthen us and strengthen our mobility and our opportunity and bring us together. That's what solves gun violence. That's what I will do.
Thank you. Councilman Menchaca?
Thank you. And again, thank you for holding this forum. I can't wait to come back. I'm assuming we're going to have more of these conversations.
What are you doing tomorrow night?
Wonderful. How do you address gun violence? Fully fund our public schools, fully fund our summer youth programs, and making those programs year round. These are systemic issues that we are addressing, and we're going to have to address. That's what we got to do. And the way to do that is to remove the budget that is incredibly bloated right now and bring it back to our communities. And like Maya, I want to continue to listen to our communities. And so if Brownsville has ideas and specific pieces of platforms that we all need to look at, I will be there to listen to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for very, very informative and thought-provoking hour. We're almost on time, just a little over. I think
we have one last, we forgot the most important question. Everybody has 15 seconds to answer. We'll just go around. We'll start at the top. And that is, and this was by special request, what is your favorite New York City-based movie? And you have 15 seconds. We'll start with Catherine Garcia.
I'm going to go with Superman.
Carlos Menchaca.
Ghostbusters.
That was a great one. Maya Wiley.
Carlos stole mine, but I'll say when Harry met Sally.
Okay, right.
All right, and Scott Stringer, we have some special guests.
I gotta answer this. On my own. Okay, Carlos, I love Ghostbusters. Okay, I follow your leadership.
Hey, you got it.
Okay, so no one said Sleepless in Seattle. So, all right answers. Well, again, thank everyone. I was going to say get home safely, but you're all probably home already. So, and thank you for participating. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, see you all again.
Bye.
Thank you. And if everybody can just hang tight, we're just going to transition to our next panel.
I think I was supposed to make some additional remarks here, but I'm not going to repeat everything we said at the beginning. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you, the candidates. I am a member of both the Central Brooklyn Political Action and NYPAN. I'm a founding member, but these is their program. So I'm just excited to be here to even say a couple of words. There are folks who've been watching. We had upwards of about 170 on Zoom. And then we have, I think I saw 5060 on Facebook. So a lot of folks following on Zoom. So we're a little over time, but not too much. So I'm going to jump off now. I don't want to take up your time. So peace and blessings to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jumani. And so the way we're running this is you're the second group that's on. We just had a very interesting, informative conversation with the first group. We are going to ask you to do three things. One is introductory remarks about yourself and your campaign and why you're running, and you'll each have 2 minutes to answer that. And then we'll have three questions that are posed by the moderators, myself and Dr. Pardo. And if we have time, which we hope, we'll have one question from the audience. And then there'll be a funny question. We'll start with Dr. Pardo.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, welcome. That was quite a seamless transition. So thank you to all of you and everybody who's behind the scenes that made that happen. As George said, everybody will have 2 minutes. So we'll just start off of the top. Again, the order was selected randomly, and we will start with Sean Donovan, the former Director of Office of Management and Budget. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Jumani, to everyone that's watching tonight. Thank you for being with us. I'm a lifelong New Yorker who went into public service because I grew up at a different time of crisis in New York. My dad is an immigrant who came from Lima, Peru, and found opportunity in New York, but I saw so many families around me who didn't get the same opportunity. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw neighborhoods of color across this city crumbling, literally burning to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work helping my city. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college. I went to work for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And then I came back to New York to work for a nonprofit starting in the Bronx that was rebuilding those same neighborhoods I saw burning as a child. In fact, one of the things I'm proudest of is my early work with Reverend Dr. Johnny Ray Youngblood, who endorsed me last week, helping build more than 5,000 Nehemiah homes in Brownsville and East New York. That was the beginning of more than 2 decades of public service, where I learned to lead through crisis. Whether it was being housing commissioner for the city after 9/11, being asked by President Obama to become housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes, or when he asked me to lead the recovery work after Sandy hit the city that I love. I also was budget director, and 3 weeks in, we saw Ebola emerge as an international threat that we went to work making sure didn't kill tens of thousands of New Yorkers. I learned through all those crises that the most vulnerable before the crisis hits get hurt the hardest. And that's why we have to measure our recovery by the recovery of our most vulnerable. That's always how I've measured progress in my career, whether it's dramatically reducing homelessness across the country when I led that strategy for President Obama, when I led the work to make our neighborhoods and our communities more racially just across this country, work that President Trump is attacking Joe Biden for now, saying he's destroying the suburbs. Or in the work that I did with the 21st Century Policing Task Force to make policing and criminal justice more equitable. That's who I am as a public servant, and that's how I'll lead as mayor of New York.
Thank you very, very much. Next, we have Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams.
Thank you so much, Doctor and George. It's good seeing you. I'll never forget the day that my son came home after sitting inside his classroom, and someone did a speech, their assignment on the history of policing in this city. And he started describing an organization that was at the forefront of dealing with stop and frisk, the forefront of dealing with some of the most important issues under the Giuliani administration and even under the administration of Bloomberg. And he came home after he heard the young man mention my name, Eric Adams. And I said to myself as I started this journey that there's a large number of people that are not aware of the history I've had in this city of over 35 years of uninterrupted service. I didn't read about Amadou Diallo. I know his mother. I was with the family as they went through him being shot at 44 times. I don't know about the stories of Abner Louima. I sat in the courtroom with Johnny Cochran. I don't know about just hearing about the Rockefeller drug laws. I marched when I was a sergeant during the 90s at Rockefeller Plaza and then went to Albany and reversed those laws. I don't know about the devastation of what happens in our prison industry just based on what I read in papers. I walked through the prisons of our upstate facilities and young men behind bars called out my name and said, "That's Eric Adams from 100 Blacks who fight on our behalf." I don't just talk about our healthcare system. I was diabetic, lost my sight, and was told I would be blind in a year and I would have real impairments in my hands and feet, possible amputations, as well as my mother. And I reversed those diseases and put a program into Bellevue Hospital. I know what life is about, and I want to represent the people of this city who are living the life that I live. That's why I'm running for mayor of the city of New York.
Thank you very much. Next, we have former Department of Veteran Services, former Commissioner of the Department of Veteran Services, it's Lori Sutton.
Hi there. So nice to be with you all this evening. My name's Lori Sutton. I'm a general, a doctor, a commissioner, a proven leader, lifelong public servant, whether at home, on the home front, in combat, or here in New York City. You know, as we started to stand up the first municipal agency in the country devoted to veterans and their loved ones several years ago, it occurred to me that we were building an incubator, a laboratory where we could take on the toughest issues facing our city, like homelessness. We brought down homelessness by nearly 90% for veterans, and those improvisations, those innovations can be applied to the greater good. But, you know, New Yorkers' issues are veterans' issues, are human issues. And on issue after issue, we realized that by taking on the tough challenges facing our city and by setting up what works for veterans and their loved ones, we're then in a position to help the greater good. And so as I saw things going the wrong way in our city, I realized that we really needed a leader who could lift up and lead forward. And I wondered where that leadership was going to come from. And, you know, I didn't see it coming. I saw the polarization and the politics of fear and lost opportunities with Amazon and other things happening in our city with the seriously mentally ill and homelessness and all kinds of trends going in the wrong direction. And so when I didn't see the leadership coming forward that really could bring us together, I recalled the words of John Gardner, who was the founder of the White House Fellowship Program that I was privileged to serve under in 96, 97 under President Clinton. He said, who gives you permission to sit on the sideline when there is a leadership challenge at hand? So I'm running for mayor to be that unifying leader, to bring sanity, to bring leadership to a city I dearly love and respect. The things that I'm most concerned about, and certainly that have to do with the topic tonight of public safety, you know, the issues, the quality of life issues from the body.
Just wrap up your thought. We're at the
Sure.
end of the 2 minutes.
Absolutely. And so it's for all of these reasons that I bring all of who I am and all that I've done during my life of service to this city at this time to run for mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And next we have Executive Director and CEO of Phipps Neighborhood, Diane Morales.
Hi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I am the product of two working class Puerto Ricans who both came here in their youth. And I'm also the proud single mother of two college students. That's me personally. On a professional level, I'm an educator. I'm an advocate. I am an activist. I've led organizations that have served some of New York City's most vulnerable populations. the homeless, the mentally ill, low-income folks, the LGBTQ population, early childhood, and I've run programs for court-involved youth, both as early intervention and also those who have been involved in the criminal legal system on the back end. I'm running for mayor because I feel like I have firsthand lived experience as a woman of color, as a first generation, as a single mother, that have exposed me firsthand to the challenges that so many New Yorkers encounter on a daily basis in just their struggle to survive. My experiences as an executive providing solutions to people in overcoming the structural and systemic barriers that prevent them from accessing opportunity gave me a front row seat as to what those barriers actually are and what it's going to take for us to overcome those challenges. So a year ago, I jumped into the race because I felt like the combination of those two experiences, my personal and my professional experiences, brought something unique to bear to the idea of leadership of New York City. And the last 8 months have made it crystal clear that the challenges that we face in this city are so deeply ingrained and so deeply embedded in our systems and structures that we need radical transformation, and we need the boldness to live up to the aspirations of what New York City can be. And so that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, and thank you all very much. We'll move on to our questions. First, New York City, as you know, is one of the most diverse in the country, but was the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States, which disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities who had higher rates of both infection and death. And we know that the death rate, the numbers of death in the United States is now over 240,000. But moving a little bit higher up than that, we know that COVID-19 really highlighted the effects of structural racism, where the communities with the highest need have less and are more vulnerable to insult, like COVID-19. It is also important to recognize that none of these health disparities are new. Here in central Brooklyn, where I am right now, Brownsville has the lowest life expectancy in New York City, and East Flatbush, where I'm physically am right now, has the highest rate of severe maternal morbidity. And we know that aside from COVID-19, the way that maternal mortality disproportionately affects Black women is something that we are working hard to try to address. So if you are mayor, what would you have done differently to protect this community from COVID-19? And going forward, what would be your plan to protect the community against health conditions that disproportionately affect this community? And first up, I start with the reverse, with Diane Morales.
Great. So I think just looking back in terms of what we could have done differently, for whatever reasons, I think the leadership of New York City took on New York City and New York State took on actually a very Trumpian response to the pandemic. There was a sense of trying to downplay it and not enough early intervention. I think we should have closed schools sooner. I think we should have begun to educate the public about the risk and what was happening, given the limited information that was available to us. I think we needed to make sure that we were providing information and access to PPE to New Yorkers, in particular, the vulnerable essential workers who were providing critical services to all of the city in order to make it possible for the city to continue to operate. One of the things that the pandemic has laid crystal clear and bare to us in New York City is that we're all inextricably linked, and those that made it possible for some of us to work comfortably from home are in fact the ones that are most vulnerable and least protected. And we need to prioritize and center those folks moving forward so that we are making sure that they're protected and taken care of, and that we recognize that we cannot survive without them. I think the other thing we could have done during that period of time was to make sure that in terms of our schools, that we were preparing and planning for how we might re-enter and re-engage with schools in a way that was safe and in a way that provided the training and support to teachers that they needed, and that also prioritized the students for whom in-person learning and education was most critical, and providing the supports to the parents throughout that transition. I see that time is up, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lori Sutton.
Thanks, Dr. Pardo. Yeah, absolutely. I think better planning and coordination as well as the crisis communication. Also, we could have set up what I called health safety hubs, sites where individuals who could not quarantine safely at home could be safely monitored, preventing them from overrunning the health systems, but also preventing them from infecting and being contagious to their household family members, particularly in those communities of color that were most affected and our essential workers. I think also when it comes to going forward, I think that we have to recognize that, here in New York, we went from worst to first, and so we did have some good leadership. Certainly, Governor Cuomo deserves a lot of credit for that. I think that also when it comes to healthcare, you mentioned what needs to be done to protect those individuals who are on the front lines. Clearly, healthcare cannot be tied to employment, and we must develop community hubs for accessible, community and culturally congruent, accessible quality healthcare.
Thank you very much. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams.
Thank you so much. So important that when COVID hit the city, I led from the front. I think generals should lead from the front. They should not send their troops into battle and ask, how was the war? I moved into Borough Hall, put a mattress on the floor, and immediately responded. I want to thank Jumaane Williams for joining me and putting in place a letter that we sent to the Department of Justice to investigate I believe, the civil rights violations that happen to Black and brown people all over the country and right here in New York City in particular. But there's something else that's significant about this moment. What we did with the knowns. We knew those with comorbidities would be the highest level of hospitalization and potential deaths, yet we did not respond to them. And when I went to NYCHA to hand out masks at the beginning of COVID-19, I was demonized by it, by some people who are still running for office today. Why was I giving face masks, face covering, and food to NYCHA residents? Because I knew that was a place where comorbidities existed. But it was something else that we need to focus on as well, testing. Why did we have a drive-through testing on Staten Island far before we had one here in Brooklyn, which was ground zero? We treated Black and brown people differently in this city under COVID-19. And what we did at the beginning of COVID-19 that was extremely significant, we divided the city into essential and non-essential workers. The essential workers were Black, brown, immigrants. The non-essential were those who were of other ethnicities, yet we had the essential workers such as train operators, hospital staff. We're not giving them the PPEs they needed. We were lying and stating that they had them while they were wearing garbage bags in the hospitals. I knew what people were going through, not because I was in the Hamptons. I was in housing. I was in hospitals. I was on the ground, on the front line, giving people what they needed. And that's the type of leadership we need in the city during these difficult times.
Thank you very much. Sean Donovan.
Thank you. Well, first, we have to begin with the idea that planning doesn't start when a crisis hits. It has to be in place when that crisis emerges. And we had a fundamentally flawed response that needed to be an all of government response. I've seen this work because I was part of it when we responded on a national level to the Ebola crisis. As I said earlier, we put in place the contact tracing and testing. We brought together an all of government response that included military leadership and every agency. And we need to be doing that now. And let's be clear, even with the emergence of a vaccine, the distribution of vaccine, particularly given the radically low temperatures, as low as 100 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit that are necessary to store, are going to take an all of government response to make sure every New Yorker has access. But let's understand that there's a deeper crisis here. which is the structural racism and inequality that led to widespread death rates within Black and brown communities that were incredibly disproportionate to the rest of New Yorkers. And that will take a much deeper, longer term plan. President Obama used to say to us all the time, never let a crisis go to waste. And so we have to go to work right now and not let this crisis go to waste. We need universal health care in New York City. We have 600,000 New Yorkers who have no health insurance at all. And we need, as we did in the Affordable Care Act, to decouple it from people's work. We need to make sure that we have decent housing so that asthma and other underlying conditions that come from our housing don't cause this widespread death that we've seen in Black and brown communities. We need a climate plan that's going to remove peaker plants and other forms of pollution from Black and brown communities. And finally, we need what I would call the 15-minute neighborhood. Every New Yorker, no matter what they look like, what language they speak, should have access to the basic necessities of life within 15 minutes. Fresh food, places to exercise in parks that will make sure the underlying environmental determinants of health that drove this crisis in Black and brown communities are a thing of the past. That's what I would do as mayor.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I hand it over to George.
Thank you. The second question has to do with police-community relations, and as has been mentioned by several of the speakers, over the years there's been a series of incidents where members of the NYPD have used excessive and sometimes lethal force against innocent people of color. This past year, tens of thousands of New Yorkers of all races became involved in the widespread national protests over the unjustified killings of Black and brown people throughout the country in several locations, such as the murder of George Floyd by Minnesota police. New York's mostly peaceful protests were met by what many have characterized as brutal and unjustified force by some in the NYPD, and a mayoral decreed curfew that many say made matters worse, resulting in controversial demands to reduce police funding. So this question has two parts. What are your thoughts on the suggestion that some have made that the Democratic Party is being damaged because of the defund the police movement? And two, how would you move forward the discussion on policing and public safety? And is there a difference between the two? So we'll start now with the Borough President of Brooklyn, Eric Adams.
Thanks so much, George. And I'm sure you know as well as I, because of our long relationship around this issue, that public safety and justice, they go together, and we don't have to have one without the other. And I believe there's some quick things we can do to reallocate funding in the police department to become more proactive and not reactive. Number one, let's use police officers to do the job that they are assigned to do. Let's take them out of clerical roles. Let's put them into the areas of dealing with serious violent crimes, like what we saw today where gang members shot up a bus on Fulton Street. We must have public safety. That's the prerequisite to prosperity. Second, let's utilize technology. We don't need our officers sitting in courts for 6-7 hours when you can use Zoom and other technologies that they can go back to patrol and protect the people of this city. Third, zero tolerance for abusers. If two people commit a crime together, one person is charged with acting in concert. If they're present, let's do the same thing with our law enforcement officers. If you are on the scene and don't take an affirmative action to stop an officer from committing an illegal act, you should be charged with acting in concert. Lastly, let's ensure that we allow New Yorkers to be police officers. Let's look at the areas of hospital police, DOT, school safety agents. After 2 years of exemplary service, let's promote them into the police department. 100% New Yorkers, over 80% Black and brown. Our police officers should come from the communities that they are from. We can do a better job in policing, and we can have justice and safety. They go together.
Thank you. Laurie Sutton?
Well, thank you so much, George. Yeah, this is such an important issue. And as we consider all of the events you mentioned, including those tragic injuries, loss of property, defacement, infractions of what policing should be in a modern city. We have a chance to reimagine what modern policing should be, to also reinvest both in communities as well as in policing, recognizing that cops need the communities as much as communities need cops. And finally, to rebuild those relationships, the relationships of trust that have been really shredded over these last several months. I think we need to develop an approach that seeks to provide better protection to victims, to set the conditions for reducing the incidence of crime, and that works to keep communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, safer when they interact with the police. To say that constitutional First Amendment, the right to protest, should be weighed against public safety, it's a false choice. Both can be preserved and must be preserved. And as mayor, that's certainly a top priority. We cannot move forward to a vibrant and flourishing New York without safety and positive community relations.
Thank you. Diane Morales.
Thank you. So let me just start off by saying that I was the first mayoral candidate to call for defunding the police, and I stand by those words, and I am not backing down. The reality of it is that the model for policing was based on slave patrols from chattel slavery days, and we can't tinker around or make incremental changes to an institution that was fundamentally based on racist practices. As someone who watched this year as my two children were both pepper sprayed as they stood innocently doing nothing peacefully, I watched in horror, unable to intervene, and then later that same night was kettled with my children as they, interestingly enough, separated from our white peers that night. As I watched an officer begin to assault my son, I am not prepared to talk in language about this that actually tinkers around the edges. Everybody wants to be safe, but policing does not equal public safety. We need to radically transform the institution of policing and actually move away from it completely, which is why I've called for the creation of a community first responders department, because the reality of it is that we know that over 80% of the calls that police respond to are actually not related to anything violent or criminal. They're related to homelessness issues, mental health issues, and substance abuse issues. We need to provide appropriate professional supports and interventions that will both save lives and connect people to the critical services and supports that they need so that they can actually overcome their challenges and survive. Men with guns should not be responding to mental health crises. Communities and safe communities are not ones that are overly police and have an exaggerated police presence. Whenever we think about a safe community, that's not what we think of. That's not what we see. Low-income Black and Brown communities should not be subjected to anything less.
Thank you so much. Sean Donovan.
So I want to agree with many of the things that have been said about the need to dramatically change the culture, the training, the transparency, the accountability that we have for police. We also need to dramatically reduce their role. They shouldn't be patrolling the hallways of our schools. They shouldn't be charged with criminalizing homelessness, where really what we're dealing with is substance abuse, mental health, and other deeper challenges that need a dramatically different response. And we need to make sure that all of those things happen. But I want to expand this question, because what this requires is not just a change in the way we approach policing, but a change in the way we think about violence and crime as a broader public health issue. We need to reimagine the way we respond well beyond policing. And what does that mean? That means our correction system has to be fundamentally changed so that we are not thinking about parole. We are thinking about community reintegration. We need to be reinvesting savings from policing and from the work in corrections into things like housing. When I was housing commissioner in the city, with much criticism, we took many of our Section 8 vouchers and gave them to folks coming out of Rikers, and the results were dramatic. 95% of those folks, after a year, were stably housed, getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. Dramatic change, just simply through providing the housing resources that were necessary. We need to be investing in efforts like NEON and so many others that can be scaled up to invest in job training and other things that really get to the underlying public health and causes of violence, rather than focusing just on change in policing, because it's going to take that dramatic response across the entire system to make sure that we end the cycle of incarceration and prison as a solution to violence, which is absolutely the wrong solution. This has to be a public health approach, and it has to be an all of government approach to solve the underlying challenges.
Thank you all.
Excuse me, George, may I ask a question, please? I was understanding that we have 90 seconds, and I'm trying to...
I'm sorry, you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Just wanted clarity. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next question, again, another topic that was significantly impacted as a result of coronavirus, the economic crisis that we are in, especially around housing, food instability, and unemployment. As is unfortunately often happens, while many of the rich have gotten richer, there are many in our community who have been affected negatively. Lack of home, a job, and even food. What is our biggest crisis since the Great Depression? Here in Central Brooklyn, is 42% of the population are immigrants, and which can be a particularly vulnerable community. Many of whom were more likely to lose their job, had increased risk to coronavirus because a significant proportion of them are our frontline workers. This is on top of the fact that they were not eligible for many of the COVID-19 relief benefits, many of whom fear detention and deportation. And again, like many of the other things that we discussed, that really the numbers do not do it justice. Like a organization like Life of Hope, where I am now, that serves the immigrant community, to see how this affected people and families and communities really cannot be overstated. So as mayor, their very survival would be in your hands. What can the next mayor do to help house, employ, and feed desperate New Yorkers? And in your response, please also delineate your plan to protect the immigrant community. And as as George stated, there's 2 minutes for each response, and we will start with Dr. Lori Sutton.
Well, thank you so much. It's been hard for, I think, every one of us to watch politics as usual take precedence over the suffering that we see all around of us, particularly in communities of color. I think that our elected leaders, both in the Senate as well as in Congress, should have been raising holy hell to get that package, the money that otherwise would have gone to businesses, would have gone to addressing so many of these needs, but just got caught up in the politics as usual cycle, and that's wrong. I think that the next mayor has to be able to understand that the world we're looking at now is absolutely different than the world we thought we knew just 8 or 9 months ago. But that opens up other possibilities that didn't exist just a few months ago. So I think in terms of protecting the immigrant community, we have to go out and actively seek to find out through the community-based organizations, through the houses of faith and worship, through folks who are coming to the city and wanting to get food, sustenance, who have housing issues, perhaps the safety, the mold, the water, the heat, now that it's wintertime. We have to be active, proactive in reaching out. We are our brothers, sisters, and keepers, and we must partner with the private sector when it comes to housing and rent. Listen, we bailed out the banks in 2008 and 2009. We can't leave tenants on the hook. We can't leave landlords on the hook. I think it's going to take a real concerted effort at all levels and some very, very pointed political leadership to lead us forward out of this crisis in a recovery for all New Yorkers.
Great, thank you very much. Sean Donovan.
Thank you. I'm so glad you asked this question because it's deeply personal to me as a son of an immigrant who watched my dad installed as a citizen in the Great Hall on Ellis Island after decades of having a green card. This is something that needs attention at every level of government and in every part of our government. First, as someone who has worked side by side with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I would go to work in Washington, D.C. to make sure that the threats of treating New York as a quote unquote sanctuary city, we should be a sanctuary city. We must be a sanctuary city. And I would work effectively with everyone in the federal government, in Congress, to make sure that we had the support we needed from the federal government. Second, we need to be working at every level across city government to support immigrants and particularly undocumented folks in the city. Our greatest gaps in our public schools are for second language learners. And so as we are reopening our schools, as we are focusing on creating dual language programs and others that are proven ways to raise the achievement of second language learners, that must be a focus of the next mayor. On healthcare, we need to expand Metro Plus so that the 300,000 undocumented folks in New York that don't have healthcare will get that coverage. We need to make sure on the housing front that we are dramatically expanding the protections that we provide. We have a moratorium on foreclosures that is about to expire on December 31st. We have an eviction crisis that is on our hands if we don't take dramatic leadership with the help of Washington, D.C. to get rental assistance and homeless prevention and rapid rehousing funds, just like we did in the Great Recession with my leadership at HUD. So those are a few of the pieces we need to put in place.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next, Diane Morales.
Thank you. So insofar as immigrants are concerned, I think, it's been made crystal clear over the last 8 months that they are critical to the fabric of New York City and a vibrant part of who we are economically, socially, and in every other way feasible. So I think that the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we are, in fact, reinforcing the ideals of operating as a sanctuary city for our immigrants. And that means ensuring that the NYPD is not cooperating with ICE in our communities and not entering our hospitals and not entering other places, public spaces where immigrants should be able to access care and be safe. That's the first thing. I also think that we need to, we need to be looking at rent and mortgage relief specifically for small landlords and homeowners and protect them in terms of utilities and property taxes as well. And again, someone else referenced this earlier, whether it's banks or luxury real estate developers, they have all benefited from tax incentives and various breaks and profited off of the backs of the working class. It is time for them to pay their fair share insofar as that is concerned. The other thing I'll say is that, where New York City goes, so too goes New York State. And so if New York City does not do well and if New York City does not come back and New York City does not thrive, the governor has something to worry about. It's a whole different level. So I think that's another thing that we need to think about. We need to push for the support from the state and the federal level. The final thing I'll say is that in terms of the issue of homelessness, we need to look at all of the vacant spaces that are available. We need to think creatively and reimagine how we repurpose those spaces so that we provide housing and a stable roof over the heads of every homeless person in New York City.
Thank you very much. And Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams.
Thank you so much. Under my leadership at Borough Hall, I am extremely pleased as how we have organized some of America's largest demonstrations in support of our immigrant under attack by the previous presidency. the landmark bodega strike in response to the Muslim travel ban, the stroller march to protest child separation policies at the border, our key advocacy to pass the New York State DREAM Act, which I co-sponsored as a state senator. And I think the next level that we need to all embrace is the expanding voting rights in municipal elections. If we want to empower our immigrant population, give them the right to vote. You pass that, then you will start sending a clear and loud message. So let's say it loud and clear. Immigrants are welcome here. 47% of Brooklynites speak a language other than English at home. This is the mecca of the immigrant population. And as I move throughout the entire borough, there's a clear message that Borough Hall has been a place of celebrating the diversity of this borough, empowering our immigrant population, and ensuring that they have an opportunity to participate in government. I'm not going to allow the immigrants in our community to take the backseat to anything in this city, and I will continue to be a strong advocate for the immigrant population in this city.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. We have, from the start, we're running a little bit behind time. So we'll have time for one audience question. There's one particular question that even from before this forum and even now in the chat that we're getting a lot of questions about. And so I think George is going to pose that to all of you this evening.
So this question has to do with gun violence. Some communities are seeing a spike in gun violence and sadly homicides. These communities are often sandwiched between street violence and, when the communities complain, over policing. That doesn't really get to the problems that's causing the gun violence. So the question is quite simple. How would you address this crisis of gun violence? And what role should law enforcement have in dealing with it? And we'll go back to the top, Sean Donovan.
So as I said earlier, this is something that needs to be a focus of the right kind of policing and the right kind of community partnerships, working at this as a public health issue, an issue of hopelessness, and an issue of underlying causes of violence that we have to get to. And so I'm not going to reiterate those points. But in addition to that, we need a mayor who's going to lead a national coalition of mayors against the gun industry and to fundamentally change the easy access to guns in our streets and in our communities. And that's something we should have a mayor once again who understands that New York City is the most important city in the country, that we can be a world leader on these issues, and we must bring together a coalition that will take gun makers to court, that will sue gun sellers, not just in New York City, but around the region. And we do have jurisdiction, if we form the right coalitions, to do that. To be dramatically more aggressive in reducing the easy access to guns, which turns what are often, look, I have two sons that are 21 and 18. They've done knuckleheaded things in their lives, but they're white and they live in communities where they're not going to be victimized by police, and they're not going to have the same kind of access, easy access to guns. And what that means is that if we can fundamentally cut the supply of guns, that is something that is going to dramatically change this situation. We need a mayor who's going to lead on that.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes, thank you, George. Important question. I dedicated my life to dealing with the issues of gun violence and how it impacts family. I've sat in hospitals many days watching the victims of gun violence. As I stated today, a senior, 70 years old, on the bus, a gun pierced through the bus and shot this 7-year-old senior. I responded over and over to these incidents throughout my 22 years in law enforcement. And there's a an accumulation of things that we must do. Yes, we must do things around legislation. Yes, we must change the ecosystem of public safety and the great tools of the CMS model that includes Man Up, Erica Ford, other organizations who have done amazing work around preventive. And yes, we must have a more proactive approach to law enforcement to prevent young people going in the areas of crime, particularly around gang violence and using of firearms. I would reinstitute the anti-crime unit with better, well-trained officers that will go after precision policing the shooters. There are known shooters in the city. We know who they are, and we need to target those specific shooters. We need to have a real conversation about the gang violence in our city and how do we have young people move out of gangs. I have been meeting with some of the top gang leaders in the city to show them how do we connect them with employment so they don't have to have a gang encounter that we're seeing. And then we need a tri-state approach to stop the flow of guns in our city. There's an overproliferation of guns. There are known gun dealers. I want to take my hat off to the district attorney who just found a transit authority employee who was actually part of a major gun running scheme. It can't be just the street level enforcement. It has to be matched with stopping the flow, and it's possible to do so. We can be safe.
Thank you. Lori Sutton?
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, this is an issue that certainly breaks every one of our hearts as we've seen the violence, we've seen the deaths, we've seen the suffering. And I will say at the onset, I'm proud to live in a city that has taken such a strong stand on gun control. Clearly, when guns are trafficked through our city, we have to take an aggressive role. We have to work with our state and our federal and yes, the gun organizations themselves. I will tell you, one of the things that really touched me a few months ago before the pandemic, I had a chance to go out and visit the 67th precinct there in Brooklyn and to talk with members of the clergy council, the God Squad, and to see that partnership, that interaction between the police and the community and the clergy. And it was just something really beautiful to behold and to see the pride that they took and their accomplishments, how many weapons they've been able to take off the streets and the decrease in crime. Those are pockets of success that we can absolutely replicate and spread throughout our city and bring hope again. And really, it's in working together, in community, in partnership, that we truly can lead our country forward. Thank you. Let me say, lead our city forward. Thank you, George. City and country.
Thank you. Diane?
Hi, thank you. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that, police are called upon to respond to crime, generally not to prevent it. And while we can address the issue of guns and need to do that, I also think that we need to focus on addressing the root of those issues. In terms of the guns, there are plenty of proven prevention and intervention programs. Eric mentioned one of them, Life Camp in Queens. We need to expand those kinds of models. But the thing about those models that actually work is that they are driven by and operated by members of the community, by people who understand and can connect with and relate to the young people who are experiencing a variety of different issues. And that's what I really want to get to, is those issues. We need to actually stem the tide. We need to address all of the insecurities that are proliferating in our communities these days, whether that's insecurity around housing, insecurity around economic stability, insecurity around food. Those things need to be addressed, because if we're not addressing that, we're just dealing with the symptoms. Mm-hmm. So we need to do something to address the issue of guns. And there are things that we can do and things that have been proven, but we also have to make a commitment to fundamentally get to the root of the challenges that are creating these disproportionate issues in some communities over others. And so, I think that we have to make this commitment, this and take this courageous step that we're going to invest in communities to provide the services and the programs that these young people need in order to feel secure and safe and like they are a part of something and like there is hope for their future. Because for as long as they're not feeling like there is hope, they don't feel like they have anything to lose.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Back to Dr. Pardo.
Yes, thank you. So, of course, I guess we'll end with the most important question after this long session, and that is, what is your favorite New York City-based movie? And you have 15 seconds, and I'm just going to start from the top of my screen. That's Sean Donovan, and I'll just go down from there.
Favorite New York-based movie?
Yes.
Was that the question?
New York City-based
Breaking
movie.
up just a little bit when you asked it.
New York City-based movie.
I would have to say Serpico.
Ooh.
Next is Laurie Sutton.
Out of Towners.
Eric Adams.
Education of Sonny Carson, old movie, remind me of when I was arrested and beaten by police and how he turned his life around.
Diane Morales.
I am totally drawing a blank on this one. I don't know.
A New York City-based TV show.
In Living Color.
That's a good one. That may have been the best one of the evening.
Good one.
All right, thank you all very, very quick. No duplicate, so that's great. So thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Before we transition to thank you all our candidates for joining us. You guys can you're relieved of your duty for this evening, so you can sign up. Before we move on to Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, I want to make sure that we thank everybody from the Central Brooklyn Political Association, the committee members that worked on this, Sarana Purcell, Sabina Davila, Mike Tucker, Alicia Knight, Lamont Joseph, of course, my co-host for this evening, George Albro, Life of Hope, Where We Are, the executive director, Paraz Luxama, Father Juan Luxama, the Life of Hope production group who is here making this all possible and working hard in the community here. The partnership and sponsors this forum, Life of Hope, NYPAN, Caribbean Image TV. I wanted to make sure we acknowledge everybody before we moved on, and I think we're going to have closing remarks from Public Advocate Jumaane Williams.
Thank you so much. I had to put my blazer back on. But thank you so much for allowing me to make some closing remarks. And Dr. and George, you did an amazing job. And thank everybody who stuck around. We had probably around at the height a little over 200 folks. I am. You can't answer these questions in as much as you want to in a few minutes. So it was good to hear at least the beginning. Hopefully we'll do this again. I would say my own big thing is I was disappointed at how many people kind of skirted the issue around their thoughts on defund the police, and really didn't really get to the heart of kind of police versus public safety. And I think that's a very important topic right now. So I'm hoping to hear more of their platform. I was really happy to hear most folks talk about getting to the root causes of gun violence. So those are my kind of two quick takeaways. But, this is just the beginning, and I'm just proud to be a part of the two clubs that put this on. So peace and blessings to everyone. Love and light. June seems like a long way, but it really isn't. So everybody is staying as safe as they can, and talk to everyone soon.
So thank you so much, Jumaane. We really appreciate your guidance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. George, a great pleasure to co-host with you. Thank you all to Facebook Live, Zoom, everybody that's joining. Do you want to close us out for the evening?
Well, thank you, Dr. Pardo, and everyone who contributed to this. I think it was a great night, and people got to see the candidates, and they all gave some interesting answers. And this will be continued.
To be continued, for sure. So glad they were all here. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Please be careful and have a good night.
Good night.